For the next 20 minutes or so, we'll show you how to build your own custom table tennis paddle using a blade and 2 rubber sheets using the paddle press tool. The paddle press contains a number of clamps and a large and small force distributor to help you with the rubber cutting and gluing process. Rubber sheets typically cost $50 to $75, and mistakes during the cutting process can make those rubber sheets unusable for competitive play. So it's a pretty high stress situation normally when you're building your paddle. With the paddle press, it makes it significantly easier and less error prone. We're going to put Dr. Evil on one side of the paddle. That's a sheet of rubber that doesn't have any sponge on it. They tend to be a pain to put on a paddle, so we'll see how easy it is to do this with a paddle press. So what we typically do is we'll start by putting the rubber sheet down, and you got to shake your glue, which we will do here. And then what you're going to want to do is put some glue in the middle of the rubber sheet, maybe about a quarter or so's worth. About that. Then you start spreading the glue on the rubber sheet so that it covers the entire sheet. You don't have to get too fancy here at this point. All you're doing is making sure the entire rubber sheet is covered with the glue. Just keep spreading it. Once you've finished spreading the glue across the rubber sheet, you'll take any excess from the rubber sheet and apply it to the side of the blade that you'll be attaching the rubber sheet to. Again, nothing really fancy, just make sure it's totally covered. You don't want to have so much glue on the sheet that it oozes out once we use it with the paddle press and start applying pressure to it. After we have glue on both the rubber sheet and the blade, you want to take the rubber sheet and lay it on the side of the blade that you'll be using it with. You want to make sure that the emblem part of the rubber sheet is at the handle of the blade. Then you take something like the roller that we're using here, just a can of foam spray, and just take out any bubbles that might be in there. Since this doesn't have any sponge, that's important for this particular paddle creation. Now we're going to use the large force distributor to make sure that the rubber sheet is firmly attached to the blade. You can adjust the anchors so that they have the right amount of force, and then you wait. I usually let the rubber sit overnight, so here we are on the following day, and we're removing the large force distributor. You can see from what we have here is that the rubber sheet is now attached to the blade. So the next step is to cut the rubber sheet to fit the blade. I normally put the cardboard that comes with the rubber sheet on top of the cutting mat during the cutting process when I'm cutting the rubber sheet to fit the size of the blade. That basically adds some level of protection for the cutting mat just to make sure it doesn't get too scratched up, because the scratches will go on the cardboard rather than on the cutting mat, and it extends the life. You want to make a light cut, and then for like your second cut, press more firmly, and just keep doing that until you cut all the way through the rubber sheet, and it will lift away from the blade. You just want to keep using that same technique, a light cut along the edge of the blade, and then cut more firmly until the rubber sheet is detached. The small force distributor holds the blade in place during the cutting process, which makes it significantly less likely that you'll make a mistake during the cutting process. Many times in the past, when I've tried to cut a rubber sheet to fit a blade, I've used different techniques with scissors and stuff, and it's just so easy to make mistakes and ruin a expensive rubber sheet. With this approach, it's pretty straightforward to end up with a perfectly cut rubber sheet every time. So you just keep cutting up until the point where the small force distributor sort of gets in your way. This particular paddle press is 4 or 5 years old at this point and has made probably 30 to 50 different paddles, and I haven't made any mistakes yet, so I've been quite happy with it. Once the force distributor gets in your way, what you want to do is basically move the small force distributor to the other side and just reclamp the blade from that end, which will give you the space to finish cutting the remainder of the rubber sheet so that it fits the blade. We just continue around the blade, cutting off the excess rubber, rotating the paddle press until the entire excess rubber is removed. At that point, we can unclamp the small force distributor, and one side of our blade is complete. You can see we have a very clean cut, no mistakes. The rubber sheet, which doesn't have any sponge on it, typically very difficult to get on a paddle, looks pretty good. So the next step is to work on the other side of the paddle. For the second side, I'm putting on Omega 5 Max. It's a fairly spinny offensive rubber, very thick. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the Dr. Evil and start by shaking our glue and then again applying about a quarter or so's worth of glue to the middle of the rubber sheet. Just like on the first side of the blade, what we're going to do is take our little sponge and spread the glue across the entire surface of the rubber sheet, making sure that it's entirely covered with glue. Once again, after the entire side is covered, we take any excess glue from the rubber sheet and spread it on the blade surface until the blade surface is fully covered with glue as well. So when you're done, you'll have the rubber sheet fully covered with glue and the side of the blade that you're attaching the rubber sheet to also fully covered with glue. Now we want to take the rubber sheet and flip it over, making sure that the label side of the rubber sheet is towards the handle of the blade. And since this one has sponge on it, it's not quite as particular as the no sponge, but we will just roll it a bit anyways. Then we'll apply the large force distributor with however much force we want to use. If it's not feeling right, you adjust it, and that's done by turning the little screws to raise or lower the clamps. Needs a little more, raise it a little higher, then we can clamp it on. Adjust the other side, and then we'll clamp that on as well. Once the paddle press is clamped, what we'll do is wait overnight typically, and the next day we'll come back and we're ready to remove the clamps, and then the next step will be remove the large force distributor, and we're ready to start cutting the second side of the blade. So once again, we use the cardboard from the uh, rubber sheet. I'll put that down on top of the cutting mat. Uh, and then we're going to use the small force distributor to lock the blade onto the paddle press so that it doesn't move during the cutting process. The cutting process is the same as last time. You make a light cut along the edge of the blade to remove the excess rubber from the blade, and then you successively make stronger, deeper cuts until the excess rubber detaches from the blade. Just like the first time, you move the paddle press, cut again, and you just keep going all the way around the edge of the blade, removing the excess rubber. So cut, cut, turn the paddle press, make a light cut, make a deeper cut until you get to the point where the small force distributor is getting in your way. Then you unclamp the force distributor and move it to the other side and clamp it back down, which frees the remainder of the blade for you to continue to cut the remainder of the excess rubber off the blade. Once you've completed cutting the excess rubber off the blade, uh, you can release the clamp and remove the small force distributor, and now you have a fully completed custom table tennis paddle. So what we're doing is we're just clearing off some of the extra little rubber bits that showed up in our cutting process, and you can see both sides look very nicely cut and smooth, and there's no issues at all with our newly built paddle. So what we're going to do next is put on a little bit of edge tape. That just protects the edge of the blade if in case you're a klutz like I am and you tend to hit the table. If you don't hit it too hard, it'll keep your blade from being damaged. So we have edge tape, and you basically start at one end and just continue around the blade, applying the edge tape along the edge as you go, all the way around. When you get to the other side of the paddle, you basically just use your little knife to cut the edge tape so that it fits up against the edge of where the rubber sheet attaches to the handle, like that. You press it all down to make sure it's there, and now we're done. We have a complete paddle with edge tape, both sides, and it looks good. Fits the blade nicely and can be used in competition because it's not messed up. And that's what you get with the paddle press. If you want a paddle press, they're in extremely limited production. There's maybe a dozen or so available. You can find them on Bonsai or get more information on the following link.